Today on Queen Me, I'm joined by somebody who traded in corporate comfort for global impact and never looked back. Kate Grant is the founding CEO of Fistula Foundation, the world's leading nonprofit dedicated to treating fistula, a devastating childbirth injury affecting over 1 million women in Africa and Asia. In her new book, No Woman Left Behind, A Journey of Hope to Heal Every Woman Injured in Childbirth, Kate shares a powerful and deeply personal story of burnout, reinvention, and purpose. She left a high-powered advertising career on Madison Ave to become a global advocate for maternal health. Kate's work is more than just about healing bodies. It's about restoring dignity, equity, and voice to the world's most forgotten women. Today, we talk about how she's built a movement, what she's learned about leading with purpose, and why solving fistula is a justice issue, not just a health one. Take a listen. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Kate. I'm so excited to have you on and to connect. Like I said before, we were recording, I've admired your work for a long time now. So I'm excited that we have the chance to actually sit down and talk.
It's great to be with you, Ashley, today. Thank you for having me.
Course, of course. And I'm especially excited because you have a new book, and in No Woman Left Behind, you describe something that so many people face, and I know I faced it a lot, is this concept of burnout. So I'm really curious about your turning point. Like you said that burnout became your turning point. So you had a career on Madison Ave, and you kind of walked away from that, right? And then how did that lead you to where you are now to focus on maternal health advocacy?
Yeah, well, I'd say burnout. I started in my advertising career when I was 21, right out of college. And like a lot of us, I'd worked, my first job at 15, I'd worked summers and holidays to help pay for college. And I went to a public school, so thankfully, emerged without debt. But I also emerged without a great sort of understanding of the world or my place in it. So I got a job with an ad agency. And advertising was fun. I mean, it wasn't like, I wasn't out digging ditches or something that's really would be arduous work. But at the end of the day, you're really just figuring out creative ways to get people to feel mostly bad about themselves so they feel good when they buy your product. When you really sort of hack into the dark arts, a lot of it is feel better about yourself by buying this thing. And when you unpack that, it becomes kind of what am I doing with my life? And the thing that was generative for me is I'd really never traveled. I mean, no people there are people that are fortunate to do summers in Europe or study abroad. I was not one of those people. And so my 26, 27, I guess I took a trip with a girlfriend and we just went around the world, which, cute girls just want to have fun. I wasn't out to save the world. I was out to see the world. But we spent about 3 months in basically the poor parts of Asia, India and Nepal, what was then Burma is now Myanmar and Indonesia. And it's the poverty was so kind of heartbreaking that coming back to my advertising life, it didn't really make any sense. But I'd love to say that I was some sort of Malala Yousafzai or Greta Thunberg out to save the world, and I loved advertising and started the Fistula Foundation. But it was actually, as you noted, it was more sort of burnout and breakdown that had me do that. I mean, I came back and had kind of the dark nights of the soul, but it was the San Francisco earthquake that sort of broke my house in half and like into pieces, and a relationship that was kind of crumbling where I looked at my life and like, what's here? What's here that's meaningful? And I was drawn to doing work. It sounds, valorous. It really wasn't. It was partly curiosity of the heart to try to do something to impact global poverty, all this poverty I'd seen, like what was still calling to my soul. So I would say the burnout came from really not paying attention to myself enough, sort of charging forward. And I've sort of forgiven myself for that now. I mean, that charging forward is what got me into college and out of college and got a good job and gave me the resources to see the world. I mean, some of that is good, but it's like all things, strength can become a weakness when it's not tempered with, I would say, humility and self-awareness. So that's kind of a long answer to a short question. Did it help you understand what I was getting at, I guess?
Yes, absolutely. And it also I feel like any sort of leap like that, right? When you walk away from something that you've known and then it leads you to something else. I mean, that requires a lot of trust in yourself and the trust that there's something bigger out there. Um, were there any signs for you that this work that you're doing now, right, really around, maternal health, that was really your calling? Were there any signs for you, or do you feel
Yeah,
something that?
I would say it's interesting you talk about like leaving things behind. If I look back, in some ways, the biggest leap I took was leaving to take this trip around the world because I didn't have a guaranteed job. And that sounds kind of like, well, of course. But for me, the way I was raised, my parents had grown up poor during the Depression, like having a job was like a big deal. So deciding I was going to like spend money on travel rather than a job and not have security, that was probably the biggest step into the unknown. It seems kind of like, well, big deal. But at the time, it felt like a big deal. Like I'm on this ladder and I'm going to jump off. So then a few years later, deciding to leave to go back to graduate school to study global poverty. I was like, I don't know anything about poverty. How am I going to help the poor when I don't know anything? So I went back to graduate school. That was another bigger leap. In terms of what was calling to me, I had done work, I volunteer work in my 20s. I was a big sister for Big Brothers Big Sisters, African American girl that lived in a tough neighborhood in San Francisco. Had a mom who had some issues, very kind and caring woman, and that opened up a view, of, I would say, more domestic poverty that I hadn't seen before. I was raised kind of middle class, not too much, but not too little. And I saw, environment that was different than what I'd grown up with. At the same time, I started doing work with Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood now has become incredibly politicized. But a few decades ago, it wasn't. I mean, at least from my point of view, I was out giving talks in high schools. This is when AIDS could kill you, and how you put, condoms on a banana to show high school kids how to not acquire a deadly infection. That's what brought me to it. So I was interested in reproductive health. And so now working on maternal health is kind of an extension of that. I would say I was interested in girls in my 20s. I mean, I was drawn to being a big sister. I'm a big sister. Literally, I'm one of four kids, but the idea of sort of giving back to an individual girl was compelling to me. And then to sort of give back to girls as they become women. I mean, women take all the risks bringing all of us into the world in too many places. And this planet, giving birth is the thing that's most likely to kill you or maim you. And so in some ways, you could see the seeds of that in things I was interested in my 20s. Now, if you told me at 25 I was going to be, you know, funding hospitals in, Ethiopia and Nepal, I would have looked at you. I'm like, I've never even been to those places. How would that ever happen? But looking back, there's sort of a trail that makes some sense.
Absolutely. And I think one of the reasons that I had reached, had researched you early on in my career was that you've you started and led this foundation, right, from supporting a hospital in Ethiopia, to you're operating in over 35 countries. I'm really curious about how you grew the foundation. Like, what were some of those core, maybe if they were leadership principles or just mindset that you had that helped you
Yeah.
grow the foundation?
Well, I joke, we're an overnight success, 20 years in the making. I mean, and you look back and go, yeah, when we started, there were, I would say 2.6 of us. Why did I say six? Because Terry only worked till 2 in the afternoon processing checks. So there, we're obviously grown a lot bigger. And as you said, we were only funding one hospital. So, what are some of the lessons? I would say just keep moving. The work will teach you. I mean, one of the things I think those earlier experiences of just sort of have some faith in the universe. That sounds a little woo woo, but I mean, that you make a step, and if it's a considered step, you might make some mistakes, you're going to learn, and just have some faith in yourself and in the world that as long as you take sort of pragmatic steps, even if it's into the unknown, I mean, the worst thing you do, you're going to fail and you're going to learn, or you succeed and you keep going. And usually it's a mix of both success and failure, and you just keep moving. So I would say when I look back at the last 20 years, that would be most of it. Step into the dark a little bit and realize that you're unlikely to completely fall. You're going to keep moving and you're going to keep growing, and have them some forgiveness for all the mistakes you make. I have this thing by Ray Dalio, who's a Wall Street guy, but has written some very compelling books. And the quote is something like, create a culture where it's okay to make mistakes and not okay not to learn from them. So that's the foundation. We're always making little mistakes. I mean, not intentionally, of course. We're not, not trying to be fools or idiotic, and we try to be very pragmatic about how we spend money. But The only way to grow, I'd say, as a person or as an organization is to be comfortable with some amount of failure. Not huge, of course. You don't want to risk, like, I don't want to risk all the equity in the organization, that we built, and risk our ability to help women in some huge way. But measured risks, kind of continual ability to take measured risks is, I would say, the way we grew. The other thing is we're obviously a nonprofit organization. We fund surgeries for women with this childbirth injury called obstetric fistula, hence the Fistula Foundation. Hence, no women left behind. We don't want women being left with this injury. And the thing is, the injury produces incontinence. It doesn't happen here because we have hospitals that have C-sections. You can be undocumented in this country and you show up in a hospital in obstructed labor, you will get a C-section. You will likely leave the hospital with a healthy baby and healthy you. Now, you might have people chasing you for the rest of your life for the bills, but you
Mhm.
won't die and your child won't die. And that's not true in a lot of parts of Africa. So we focus on getting these women that don't get the C-section or are left incontinent, life transforming surgery. Take them from outcasts too often. They're, in a dirt floored hut. Being incontinent is a bad thing. That's not a forgiving surface. And often these women are ostracized, treated like modern day lepers. So what we do
Mhm.
is provide this surgery that really is life transforming. Our tagline is help give a woman new life. And that sounds like hyperbole. How many of us have read something about a new face cream that's going to give you a new life? But this really does that. And so I would say the other thing that's made us successful actually is focusing on that, having some blinders on. There's a lot of bad things that happen in poor countries with poor governance and, loose rules of law in Africa. A lot of bad things happen to good people. We focused on this one thing. We've sort of had blinders on about other problems, which is hard because there are other problems. We say we're going to just do this one thing and we're going to do it really well. We're going to do it better than, at the risk of sounding arrogant, better than anybody else in the world. And right now, we fund more of these surgeries than the UN, and even before the implosion of USAID, than
Mhm.
USAID. So we have demonstrated we have capability in this one area. But again, the lessons are keep moving, keep learning, forgive yourself when you make mistakes, and then try to be as focused on one thing as you can. I say we basically have like the Adam Smith invisible hand, businesses, basically the bottom line of profit drives decision making. With us, it's not so much profit, it's because we're a nonprofit, but it's how many women we can get treated. And that ends up being this, again, this kind of invisible hand. If somebody comes in, I obviously run the place and has an idea, they better be able to describe to me how that's going to help us help more women. It
Mhm.
seems like it's something that's a little bit fluffy, like we should go to this conference. For instance, my
Mhm.
conferences are my buggy boo. If you can demonstrate to me that we need to get everybody in a ballroom in a capital city to, advance the field, you got my attention. But in this day and age where you can do Zoom calls and emails for free, I may be not into that, if you know what I mean, just as an example. Anyway, again, another long answer.
Yeah, this is great, but that's so helpful and that's so key because so many, I think, organizations aren't as effective because they start out wanting to do one thing and then they try to do it all.
They do, and it's
Yeah.
an understandable thing. There's actually a phrase, you maybe have heard it before, called mission creep. Our mission is to help all these women. And we would get initially some very compelling proposals. Well, you care about fistula, why don't you help train midwives because they can help deliveries? You care about helping women, have healthy pregnancies and deliveries. Well, contraception can be very important because it can help women, which is true. I mean, help plan and space children so that the pregnancies are more healthy. You care about girls, and women, and education we know is very important. And all of those things, I could make a good case for any of those things, midwifery training, contraception, girls' education, being worthy endeavors in and of themselves. But as I joke, we're not the Worthy Endeavor organization, we're the Fistula organization. So it is that part is somewhat brutal. And like we have to make peace that we're going to do this one thing. And we're going to have to leave those other things to other people. And there are a few organizations that I've paid attention to that work in a similar space to us. And you can see that they do a variety of things that are sort of co-located, if you will, or adjacent or whatever strategically. But the problem with that is that you're also going up a little learning curve. So you're not as efficient doing everything because you're learning as an organization how to do it. And you can end up just stalled because you end up spending a lot of time and money paying people like me rather than paying surgeons in Africa to get women treated or whatever it is. So we're pretty, maybe ruthless, isn't it? Determined, laser focused. And I do think that's important. It is, it's important.
Absolutely, absolutely. And while we're really talking about fistula, I'm curious more of your thoughts on this because we know it just doesn't affect the body. It's so connected to systematic injustice. Um,
Oh, it definitely is. I mean,
mhm,
fistula, just again, it's a childbirth injury. Women stay in labor for days.
mhm,
And it used to exist here, back to injustice, um,
mhm,
in Manhattan, in New York, where the Waldorf Astoria Hotel sits right now on the Upper East Side. In the 1890s, there was a fistula hospital closed, so like 130 years ago, because women here at that point were having births at home and didn't have access to emergency care the way we do now. And so you did have fistula happening to women here. It's largely been eradicated because of C-sections and forceps deliveries, basically access to emergency obstetric care. So, who's it affecting? The poorest of the poor in the poorest countries in the world. And the two root causes are, in some ways, obvious: poverty, because they can't afford, emergency obstetric care, and gender, because only women have babies. Now, I'm not a strident feminist, but if you just look at this, you go, well, wait a second. Why is it that countries aren't investing so that the people that are bringing all of us into the world have the resources they need to deliver babies safely? I would argue there's a gender lens on that. In many of these countries, you have plenty of money to put into weapons and not enough money to put into safe care for mothers. And the poorer the country, often the more inequality there is. Girls are fed less than boys, they get fewer years of education. And when it comes to political and economic power, men have much more power often in poor countries than women do. And so fistula, which is a childbirth injury, to me is just, it's a symptom of these deeper problems: poverty, 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 and then gender that makes poverty worse for women. As Justin Trudeau, I believe, was the first one to say it, although I'm sure millions have thought of it, the former prime minister of Canada. Poverty is sexist. So, yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And what's something that you wish more people understood about global maternal health?
Well, I mean, yeah, basically that it can be perilous if you don't have access to care. I think what happens is, most Americans understand this. I hadn't traveled anywhere, and most of my family hadn't when I, went off to see the world, and my the girls just want to have fun adventure. But I think there's a tendency to think that childbirth is safe because it is in this country. I mean, we actually, in some ways, have shameful maternal mortality rates with women of color. I mean, Bangladesh is a safer place to have a woman than practically than here if you're a woman of color in terms of lifetime risk of death. Lifetime risk of death in the U.S. from maternity and childbirth is about, I think it's 1 in 2,000 something. If you go to the European Union, it's 1 in 11,000. What does that mean? Most of us have never met somebody who's been touched directly by maternal mortality. That's not true in sub-Saharan Africa, where the lifetime risk might be closer to 1 in 40, where it's not at all uncommon to have a woman die because of pregnancy and childbirth. So I guess I'd love for people to understand that the differentials, or the biggest difference between rich and poor in this world in health outcomes, is the odds of dying in pregnancy and childbirth. And I think what happens is it's hard for us to get support for what we do because most Americans, for instance, say, "Oh, that's pretty safe. I don't know anybody. That's not." Well, it would be a very different situation if you went to Chad or
Mhm,
Sudan or Mali or, wherever it is we work, name the countries. I mean, so I guess that's the thing I'd like for people to understand. And
mhm,
fistula, which can devastate a woman's life, is usually simply because she didn't get a C-section. I mean, I met
mm,
a woman, I wrote about her in my book, that still haunts me. 90% of the cases are curable. Like, what you take women in an operating room, and a skilled surgeon with specialized training can fix this injury. But about 10% of the cases are too significant. Like in the case of this woman I met in Bangladesh, she was a Rohingya refugee. She stayed in labor for days and days, finally delivered a stillborn baby. But her injury was so significant that most of her bladder was gone. I mean, like, how did that happen? Well, lack of oxygenated blood, and the organ just basically mostly died. And her son, who's about the same age as my son at the time, is standing next to her bed, and she's gripping my hand, I think, thinking, this lady, they're doing a press tour for somebody, and so there was lights on me and stuff, and that I could somehow fix her. And I get this translation from the doctor. I'm asking about her injury, and I mean, it was all I could do to not just break down sobbing because there's nothing I could do for this woman. There's nothing anybody could do for her. And I think about it, it still haunts me. I think partly because I saw her in me. I saw the son. I saw that could have been me there, but for the grace of God, I could have been that woman. And and it still is shocking to me, like just the lack of, if she'd had a timely C-section, she probably would have had a healthy baby, and she wouldn't ended up with her life being ruined. And so those cases haunt me. But the happier news is that 90% of the time that women don't end up where she is. They end up, with a new life. And I wish our biggest challenge, actually 20 years in, it's why I'm so grateful for your time today. It's why I wrote the book, is getting attention for this issue. I think a lot of our donors, I mean, the surgery on average cost, and this is a real number, $633. It's not a marketing number. It's the real number across in the weighted average across our facilities for what a surgery costs. And then that's not a small amount of money to most of us, but it's small compared to what it does, which is it gives a woman who's usually injured in her early 20s decades of a healthy life rather than years of misery. So the thing about, I mean, incontinence, I mean, some of us know people that are incontinent because of, age, infirmity, surgery, injury. I mean, men with prostate cancer sometimes can end up being incontinent, and that we wouldn't wish that on anyone. The thing is, though, here you have depend pads, you have hot and running water so you can bathe. You have most of us have more clothes than we use. We're going off to the Goodwill once a year with grocery bags full of clothes we've decided we don't need. The same is not true in a poor part of a developing country where often women don't have multiple changes of clothes, maybe two. They don't have they don't have hot water, period, or even cold water that's running. Somebody's walking off to a well or a stream a mile away and bringing it back in a jerry can or something. It's a much more disabling and ostracizing condition, and it doesn't have to be this way. That's the thing. This isn't a problem for which there's no cure. It isn't that. It's surgery can be transformative, and that's why I've been focused on this because it really does change a woman's life dramatically, and I've seen that joy that's just profound because the before and after is so dramatic, and it motivates me. That's for sure.
Mhm. I love that so much. And one of my favorite parts too is that you talk a lot about how, purpose is better than power, right? And that,
Is
you know, that whole mindset and philosophy. So I want to hear more about that mindset for you and really how that's shaped your leadership, because a lot of young women, I think, are looking for their purpose, that thing that's going to drive them. So can you talk more about that?
Yeah. Well, again, if you talked to me when I was young, I mean, if you talked to me when I was, in my early 20s and said, "Oh, you should go join the Peace Corps," I would have been like, "Take a hike." I'm not gonna, I mean, I don't want to join the Peace Corps. I want my own apartment. I want a car. I didn't, I mean, like I said, I didn't grow up poor, but I grew up, there were four of us, tightly spaced in 6 years. I mean, we had like two pairs of shoes, the school shoes and the church shoes. And, I mean, I didn't want, I mean, for much, but we didn't, family, our vacations where we got in the station wagon and drove to Montana and saw my grandparents. We didn't get on planes and go to, Cancun or wherever. I mean, so I mean, I hadn't seen. I have nothing to complain about because there wasn't want in my life. I mean, in any significant way. I went to public schools, walked to those. But if you told me in my early 20s, like to just like chuck my, wanting of a car and my own apartment stuff, I would have, no way, man, I want this stuff. But, you get to a point, and I'm thankful I got to it partly because of this trip, where these things our culture tells you should want, which is money equals success. And I think for most of us, when we listen to the little voice inside, the stuff that money buys us doesn't give us, I mean, some kind of transformative feeling. It doesn't. I mean, it's fleeting. Who doesn't like a new pair of this or that? But how fast does that go away? Pretty fast. And the more you have of it, it's almost like a drug. I'd say that the more shallow, in terms of how, the joy it brings. And so, as far as what one's own path is, my advice, such as it is I said this to somebody, it's like, listen to that little voice that whispers and give it a microphone as much as you can. Like that voice that was whispering to me, that which is like, are you sure you want to basically like, sell stuff the rest of your life? Just basically be a shill for stuff you don't care about. I mean, I remember one time I was sitting in a meeting. I'm slow in some ways to figure out that's what we were about. I was working on Levi Strauss business. Now, Levi's is a great company. They were very early on in providing same-sex benefits, doing a lot of work on HIV/AIDS, funding in the community at a foundation. I mean, who doesn't like a good pair of Levi's, right? But I'm sitting in a sales meeting and they're going through all these different washes of jeans and cuts and all the rest of it. And I thought, like, why do you need like 10 pairs of these things? You don't really. And like, why am I trying to make somebody feel like they need this year's wash when last year's jeans are probably fine? I mean, the reason I like Levi's is they wear forever and they get better with age, not but I thought, well, no, but that's how this whole enterprise continues to go. Everybody bought one pair of jeans and they kept them for 20 years until they pretty much just wear out. You're not going to have a business. And then I step back and go, but the advertising we're developing is trying to make people want all this stuff. And I thought it's so not in concert with my values. And but that meant setting aside all the money. It meant sort of risking all that. But so how do you do that? You listen to that voice that's saying this is not enough. It's just not enough. Like, so I get a bigger apartment, so I buy an apartment, so I get a nicer car rather than a used Honda. I mean, who cares? I mean, really. I mean, but the dominant culture is telling you that's the stuff you should want. And listen to the little voice that tells you there's more to it than that.
Yes, absolutely. It's so true. It's so true. And I think one of the things that's so empowering about you as well is that, you end No Woman Left Behind with a call to action, right? And I think for people listening to this show, um, who maybe want to live with more purpose, what's maybe one step that they could take today to maybe ensure that no woman is left behind?
Well, I mean, here's a small thing you could do, and it sounds self-serving, but it's not. 100% of the profits of the book go to the foundation. So one of the ways we've grown over time is, I would say, sister to sister. I mean, 85% of our donors are women. Now, one of the people that's done the most for us is columnist Nick Kristof of the New York Times. And, obviously the New York Times, I think both gender, I mean, everybody reads the New York Times. It's not a female oriented press, but most of our donors are women. So what can you do? You could buy the book. I mean, on Amazon, I don't know, it's on Amazon and Bookshop, I think it's Walmart. I mean, it's all over the place, Target. You can just order online. And I think the cost per book is around $15 for the soft cover. And again, 100% of that profit goes to us. Then read it, and then have a book group. I mean, there's a list of sort of topical questions in the end. So you could you for not much money you could have a book group with your friends and learn something about women in developing countries, because there's some facts that are woven in. When I first started writing it, I was thinking more of like a how-to book, and then that got boring really fast. And so it's a memoir, because I thought I'm not teaching a class where somebody has to read the book because I'm going to give you an exam at the end. You're going to go through with the highlighter so you get the key points for the, the test. I mean, it's not that. So if the book is a bad read, who's going to read it? And so far the reviews have been really positive and encouraging. And I did have, even though I didn't have a ghostwriter, I did write it myself. Because I'm a total overachiever. Now I had 3 different editors giving me different kinds of advice because I wanted to make it a good read. And the last one, it was a guy actually, and he does mostly like stuff in Hollywood. I found him through I could tell you it'd be boring, but how I found him, and he only had a few days. And I said, okay, here's what I want. Read through it and be ruthless. Just tell me where it's boring, because I didn't have perspective on it. So the book that's now printed is 50 pages less, because there was 50 pages out of the 320 or whatever it was at that point that were boring. I mean, not in, it was mostly like couple paragraphs here. It wasn't like I just chopped whole sections. But it's a better read. It's leaner, but it does have information in there woven in there about maternal health, so that I think you learn something about lives of others, let alone how to build a nonprofit when you get to the end of it. So that's something that could be helpful to us. Obviously, we run on donations, and that's how we fund surgeries. So donations are obviously helpful. But one of the things that's even as helpful to us, or maybe even more helpful, is kind of spreading the word to other people, because that's the hardest thing for us. Because the injury doesn't exist here, even we get an article in the New York Times, there's nothing that resonates it back at people. Like, there are other issues people work on, like global warming or something, and there's articles like every day that have some element of global warming that reminds you of this problem, let alone the fact that it's, sometimes way too hot to be outside in a day when it didn't used to be like that. That's not true for us. In fact, almost, because maternity is generally a safe event for women here, day-to-day reality does the opposite of reinforce what we do. It almost, it's not that it hides it, it just doesn't reinforce it. So something like people doing a book club about, for us, that's a relatively modest amount of money, but that helps kind of open hearts and minds, maybe wallets eventually, that could be really helpful.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we'll link, of course, everything in the description and links to more of your work. But my last question for you, and probably my favorite, is because we end every episode with this question. What does it mean to you to unleash your inner queen, and how do you do that? How do you unleash your inner queen?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, one of the things I do is meditate every morning. That sounds, again, woo woo, but it came from burnout about 10 years, 12 years ago. I ended up in a hospital, and I mean, that's enough to, let's come to Jesus if there was one. Like, how did I end up in a hospital in London? I mean, I wasn't deathly ill, but it's the only time I've been hospitalized other than delivering a baby, my one child. But so I unleashed that inner queen by partly
Mm,
listening to her as much as I can, listening to her. She can be very wise when I don't drown her out too about people and situations. She can inform me, say this, don't say that. Remember what this person did. Be present with what they're feeling as much as I can. My problem is sometimes my inner queen is like driving me forward, like, get out of my way. So to make dust or eat dust, that expression from the old West. And lead, follower, get out of my way, another expression. Most of the time I'm just like, I'm leading, get out of my way. And I need to calm that voice, because sometimes I need to follow others. So
mhm,
it's giving that little voice a mic, and then I would say listening to it, even when it's telling you you're kind of sometimes on the wrong path, or you may be messed up or something. It's giving yourself permission to also make some mistakes.
mm. I love that. I love that. I mean, thank you so much for everything that you do, and for taking the time, and just to remind everyone, your new book, it's just such a beautiful blend of memoir, mission, and movement. And it's really helping people understand that purpose can start with really a single decision to care more deeply. And you can get the book wherever books are sold, and 100% of the proceeds go directly to the foundation, and all about funding free surgeries for women in need. So we're so excited that you took the time to join us, and for people to hear your story, more about the book, and just so appreciate everything that you've done and continue to do.
Well, thank you so much, Ashley. Like I said, the toughest job we have is spreading word about what we do, and you've helped us enormously today with that. So I'm grateful to you.
Thank you so much.